All right, gonna leave the chat here in my second monitor and gonna share my screen with you guys. So today we're going to be doing something different from the last few coachings. For today, I wanted to do something more interactive and more similar to what I usually do in coaches at BRPC. If you're here and you don't know what BRPC is, my stake in a coaching for profits company. Most people call it a stable in the poker community. And we have coachings every week there. I have coachings every week with my students. In a format that I really enjoy doing is drilling spots with the student and trying to really get into his head about what is exactly his thought process is and correcting some mistakes and some leaks in the thought process as we go. I think it's a very, very interesting format. I think it's going to be very insightful for most people. Even if you don't participate, it should be very insightful so that you can see leaks in other people, because leaks in other people's thought process can very often be our own leaks. Rags tend to play very similarly in most spots. So I think it can be very good. So for today, I'm going to need 3 volunteers, okay? So 3 volunteers I'm going to need for people to participate through voice, okay? Not only just text in the chat, but interacting here with me using the microphone. Okay, so who wants to volunteer? I need 3 people. Maybe we're not going to be able to interact with all 3, but I think 3 for today is good. Bruno Silva said, I think I can do. Just reminding you guys that you have to be confident with your English, okay? Because we're not going to be speaking Portuguese here. So if you're Brazilian, make sure you are confident with your English. So Bruno was the first. All right, I need 2 more. If nobody else wants to do, I'm up to. Frank said I will do. Jesus is always very gentle, man. Come on, man. Take your spot. But he said if nobody else wants. So if someone else wants, then takes Jesus' spot. If not, we can do with Jesus. Who else wants to volunteer? So Balaj is here. Nice. Arthur just got here too. All right, no one volunteered, so it's going to be Bruno, Jesus, and Frank, okay? I'm going to RNG the 3 of you to pick someone to start. Just leave and get back? What do you mean, Frank? Are you ready, Frank? Because you were the one chosen to start. David said, Saulo, you look so serious today. Really? I think I look the same as I always do. Are you ready, Frank?
You can listen me? You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so let's do it.
Awesome. All right, guys. So as I said, we're going to drill some spots, and my focus will be trying to understand the student thought process and maybe correcting something that is not perfect or that needs attention. And I think this will be very, very insightful. Let's start with single raise pots IP. And then for the next student, we're going to do 3-bet pots out of position. Maybe we do 5, 10 hands. I don't know how long it's going to take each hand, but I think 5 hands should be good. I'm also up if a replacement is needed. All right, thank you, GM. So let's go. So let me share my screen, if I can manage to do that. All right. Can you see the browser with GTO Wizard?
Yes.
Awesome. Very good. So let me put this here and let me put the chat again. All right, great. So we're going to start drilling here. Single raise pot button versus big blind. I'm going to choose us as the hero IP, any board, and let's use the 500 now basic solutions. I'm not going to use the complex solutions as they can be a little bit confusing with all the sizes. So let's just use the basic ones. So Frank, what I want you to do is you're going to do two analysis for me. You're going to tell me how do you think your range plays as a whole? And this is all GTO land, okay? I don't want you to start talking about exploitative adjustments. We're going to be able to talk about exploitative play in the future. Today, I want you to tell me how do you perceive your range is supposed to play in GTO land in terms of frequency and sizing, and then you go from a micro analysis talking about your specific combo. So you start talking about your entire range, then you make the analysis about your specific combo. Okay, is that clear?
Okay. Is that clear?
Awesome. Let's go then. So first hand, you have ace queen of spades on king 4-3. You're going to see that there's an RNG here in the bottom left. I want you to use the RNG as well. Okay, so you're going to talk about your range, first step, talk about your combo, second step, then third and final step, make a decision based on the RNG. Okay, so that's what I want you to do. So please go ahead and start.
Okay, I think the range here is gonna bet small. Have some range advantage. You have more king X. And although we don't have a lot of fours and threes, that's is good for the big blind. I think the range is gonna be bet small and some big bets and some frequency. With
Nice.
ace with ace queen, I think you can mostly bet, and the RNG, I think it's still in bet big here.
So you want to bet big at this RNG?
Yeah.
What sizing?
Mm.
120 or 73?
7-3.
73. Let's see. So it's an inaccuracy. We see that the sizing is never used. Okay, so I think your analysis was very good. This is a board where we're usually going to bet small, and your combo is not going to have much incentive to size up. Okay, it's a combo that has a lot of equity. You want to expand villain's calling range, and we see here we have very few overbets. We have a little bit of the three quarter, but mostly small bets. Okay, if you want to simplify your life and just choose one sizing, I would say just pick the smaller one. And if we click on the polarized sizing, we see here it's a range constructed around king queen plus, king jack plus, so something very very standard, right? So it's not going to be an EV loss, I think. If we take a look at, let's remove this. If we take a look at the EVs, so ace queen of spades, you lose like zero point 0.1 of a big blind by sizing up, but it's important to size down with these very strong high showdown value type hands. All right, now a very interesting turn, flush card turn. This is a major source of dissonance and confusion for a lot of people. So what sizing do I pick? Do I bet? Do I check? So tell me a little bit, how do you think your range is supposed to play here? And then go talk about your combo. And then third step, make a decision based on RNG, all right?
Okay, on the turn, I think will be some splitting as well. Very small with some combos that you keep the calling range of the villain, and betting big with some part of the range that's gonna get track, gonna get value from some part of the range. So I think ace queen bet big here.
When you say
Just
bet big, you mean over bet or you mean
no
74?
74.
Do you think your range wants to use over bets here or not?
Mm. Yeah, but I don't see that a lot of frequency. I think it's just a small frequency, so I'm not using overbet. I might be wrong, but that's how I see our range.
Nice.
So in the RNG, I would be bet just 74 here.
Okay, so let's talk about what's happening here. So the RNG is 94. So the way I use RNG and the way I recommend you guys using it is ask yourself whether or not you should take the aggressive option with that RNG number. Okay, so what that would mean is, so Frank decided that he wants to bet 74. What he would do then is, do I want to bet 94% of the time with the sizing? If the answer yes, you go ahead and bet. If the answer not, you go ahead and choose the other option that you decided this combo should play. Maybe you think this combo should split between 74 and overbet. Maybe you think this combo should split between 74 and check. Whatever that is, you're going to split based on the RNG number. So if you think you should bet 94, you go ahead and click bet. So you said that you want to still bet even with this RNG. So what this means is that you think this hand slow plays only 6% or less. So you think this hand never checks more than 6% of the time. Is that what you really think? Or
Yeah.
so you think this hand never slow plays?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have guessed it's something like Ace Jack, or would it slow play more?
Interesting. Expand on that and try to give me the arguments. Why do you think Ace Jack of Spades would slow play more than Ace Queen of Spades?
Because most of the things that I saw, mm, when the flush comes, is mostly Ace Jack that is slow playing Ace Jack or Ace 10. Mm,
Interesting.
I don't have the reason, the actual reason, but that's what I saw in the most things that I
All
run.
right. So I'm going to turn this back to the chat and ask a question to the chat. And you guys, please feel free to answer and post your opinions. Um, do we have to slow play flushes on the turn? Or should we always bet flushes on the turn? How do you guys perceive that we're supposed to play with flushes on the turn? Let's see the opinions there in the chat. And while people type, you can talk about your own opinion, Frank. So, how do you perceive that flushes should be played? Always check or always bet, but have to mix
No,
some
no, no,
checks? And
no.
why
We
do you
mix.
think we should slow play?
We mix some checks, but we mix by checking some flushes that small flushes. I would guess the baby flushes. Mm, mm,
More small flushes than big flushes. Why that's the case? You think?
mm. Just to when you have these big flushes, but we want to get value for the maximum value that we can get. So and with the small baby flushes, we just want mix and then just have some flushes in our range. I think.
Okay. So there are some things you need to improve there with that thought process because, of course, flushes want to get value, right? And big flushes, baby flushes, they're all going to have very similar equity here because ranges are very wide. Of course, the small flushes are going to lose to some big flushes, but you also need to think that from uh, the big blind is going to three bet a lot of his high card flushes pre-flop because he's going to three bet the broadest pre-flop. So hands like ace queen of spades, ace jack of spades, ace ten of spades, king queen, king jack, king 10, those are all very high frequency three bets from the big blind. So he doesn't even have all that many high card flushes. Okay, so your low card flushes are very strong here. They have very good equity. But the thing here is that villain still has flushes. Big blind still has flushes in his range. So if you never slow play flushes as the IP on the turn, then you become extremely exploitable in pretty much any blank run out. Villain could just place massive bets against your range because you would never have flushes in your check back range. Okay, so for sure, it is a part of the equilibrium strategy to have some checks with some flushes. And then you have to think about, all right, so which kinds of flushes would make more sense to go into the checking range? And then you're going to have to think about blockers. Okay, let's see what people are saying in the chat. I think we have to slow play more than 6%. I would say we slow play king x flushes more than the other. Very interesting thought here by Gian. So Gian, if you can expand on that on the chat, that would be great. Definitely more than 6%, said Bruno Silva. Yes, I agree with Bruno. We need to check back some nuts because if not, we are capped to not have nuts in check back range. Yeah, so we do need some flushes, particularly for the blank runouts. Okay, so we're still going to have flushes, let's say, when a fourth flush card comes on the river, because you're going to have some offsuit hands, right? So this is an important factor when you're thinking about protecting, in quotes, or not your range. The very reason why we slow play less in position than out of position is because we can just check back, and some parts of our range are going to improve to the nuts anyway. Okay, so when you are IP, you don't need to slow play the nuts in the current street very often because some parts of your range are going to improve to the nuts on the next street because you get to see the river card all the time. Okay, so you don't need to slow play all that much compared to out of position because out of position can't see the river immediately, right? So let's see. King X flushes are heavily blocking OP calling range, therefore we check those more. That's a very good argument. Okay, that's a very good argument. So if you want to think about slow playing, you have to think about blockers. So what are the blockers that would favor checking more over betting more? So you can think about blockers to calling range, exactly as Gian is talking about here. So if I have a hand that heavily blocks my opponent's calling range when I bet, then it makes sense to mix in some more checks with that hand. Another thing you have to consider is if you have a flush, you really want to face bets on the river, right? You want to build the pot. You want money to go into the pot. So if you have a flush, you want to have blockers that unblock villain's leading range on the river. You don't want have hands that block your opponent's leading range because that means that villain is going to put less money into the pot for you. Okay, so blockers to villains calling range on the turn and blockers to villains reopening range on the river. Okay, so what do you guys can tell me about the ace of spades? Does the ace of spades blocks more reopens or more checks from that opposition player on the variety of river runouts? Is villains more likely to check the ace of spades on the river or to bet the ace of spades on the river? What do you think, Frank?
More likely, I would say, the best blocker for him.
More likely to bet?
Yeah.
What do you guys think in the chat? Casimir said check. All right. Ace-X is going to check a lot after check because enough showdown value. More likely to bet ace of spades because it blocks the nut flush. So some diverging opinions here. But I would say for sure more likely to check. Okay, so imagine that you bet along the flop as we did. So we're going to bet a very high frequency on the flop. We're not going to be able to bet all of our air on this turn. Okay, so we're going to have to check back some air on this turn. Therefore, if villain gets the river in a variety of blank rivers and he has the ace, he's going to have a lot of showdown value. Okay, he's going to have a lot of showdown value, and he most likely does not want to turn the ace high into a bluff, even though he has the ace of spades. Okay, so by having the ace, you block a decent amount of your opponent's checks by the river, which increases the likelihood that he's going to lead into you. Okay, so the ace of spades is decent. It is a positive blocker effect towards slow playing a bit more. The queen of spades now not so much because if villain floats with the queen of spades on the flop, generally he's going to want to bluff with that because queen high is not going to have as much showdown value. So let's say he floats flop with queen 10 off, queen 9 off. Most of the time those hands are going to be bluffing the river. Okay, so you kind of have neutral effects with your cards when it comes to blocking your opponent's reopens by the river. So that alone doesn't really answer whether you want to be betting or slow playing more with this hand, and you have a decent amount of blocker effects when it comes to your opponent's continuing range because he's never going to fold the ace or the queen of spades. Okay, so we block some of our opponent's calls, and we have neutral effects towards our opponent's leading range in the river. So I would say we slow play some amount, but not very often with this hand. And I would think that having the king will slow play a little bit more often. Okay, we're going to be able to check that into the solution. Now, Frank, do you want to change your answer here, or do you still want to bet this hand 94% of the time?
Now think I want to change.
Now you want to change?
Yeah.
Let's see then. Checks. So he checks 53% of the time. So that's very interesting, even more than I would expect. I would expect something around 20% checks with his hand, but he checks 53% of the time. Okay, so perceive, and this is very important because you could be playing, and I say you, I'm directing this talk to everyone watching, okay? You guys could be playing a strategy that makes you naturally exploited against the population strategy because the population is very reckless with their river probes. Okay, so if you're capping your range too much, you're going to be naturally exploited by a population that is betting too much as the river probe. Okay, so we have to slow play there very often with our flush. Glyda said, could someone recap the action for me? Yeah, single raised pot, butterflies big blind. In this drill, he ended up betting 75 on the flop. It was actually mostly a small bet, but he decided to bet 75. Uh, Now, well, we checked, and villain bet super small on the river. Let me check exactly the sizing. The sizing is up there. You guys can see the action here on the top. So he bets 20%. So again, Frank, tell me, how do you think your range is supposed to play? And try to give me a little bit more numbers. Okay, so I want to hear from you how often you think your range raises here, for what sizing, how often you think your range calls, and how often you think your range folds. And then move the analysis to your combo, and then make a decision based on RNG. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. I think a range is gonna raise. Hmm. I would not. I really don't know the numbers, but I would say something like a 20%, 25%, with some
Mm-hmm.
flushes and king X and some slow placed aces, some 8X. Some I think we have a decent frequency of raising, especially
Nice.
against this small bets. So with this component for sure is a easy race, and I would bet mm, raise something around
40
six,
or
eight,
two thirds?
six, 2/3, 2/3.
2/3. All
Yeah.
right. Let's see. Yeah, so it's almost pure 2/3 with a little bit of smaller raise. Now I'm gonna make a question to you guys in the chat. Okay. Some smaller raises, for example, like king, queen off with the spade, medium raises for trips, and big raises for the slow played flushes. There were only three options of raises here, and one of them being all in. I don't think this all in is ever gonna get used here, so it's mostly just the smaller one and the medium one in this sim at least. But your analysis is somewhat what would make sense here for sure. Now I want to make a question here for you guys in the chat. Here in the hand, Frank decided to bet 75 on the flop, right? So he bet 75. The range was mostly betting one quarter pot here, 27%. And we saw that in this exact sequence, ace queen of spades was still playing 53% of the time. So I want to ask you guys the following. Had we bet a quarter pot on the flop, do you think we're going to slow play more or less with ace queen of spades on the turn? What do you guys think? If we had bet 1/3 or one quarter pot on the flop, would we slow play more or less on the turn with our specific combo? Less, 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 bet more. Nice. So everyone saying that we're going to slow play less. Why is that? Give me arguments, and now we're going to see the answer. Most important is the argument, right? Not necessarily just getting the right reason, getting the right answer. We need to know why that's the right answer. Slow play last because OOP range is going to be wider. what does it mean exactly that it's going to be wider? Of course, we all know what that means. It's going to have more hands. But why is the fact that he has more hands makes you incentivized to fast play more? Because we bet with our whole range, OP range wider, we can bet wider. Well,
I
the
would
nut
say that
flush isn't
I,
necessarily betting wider, right? It's just the nuts. Go ahead.
I would say that we want slow play less just because we have more bluffs. So we have more bluffs, so we have incentive to get value from our strong combos. Mhm. That's
Okay.
different when you bet big on the flop. We're more polarized, so you have to check more some trash combos.
All right. So this is a little bit backwards, okay? You should always think of your range thinking about first the value hands. So the bluffing hands are merely there to balance your value bets. So you have to think always about how many value bets my range has, how strong are those value bets, and then you think about the bluffs, okay? Because the range is wider when we bet small on the flop, and we can have more bluffs. So the same type of thinking here from Vini, which is a little bit backwards, okay? You always have to think about your value hands first. Overall range bets more, nuts bets more. That's usually true, but here our overall range is not gonna bet more on the turn, right? That's usually the opposite. When we start polarizing the flop, we're generally gonna have higher barreling frequencies in further streets. Because our range is a little bit more polarized, we don't have that middling part of the range that wants to check. So therefore, we almost always barrel at higher frequencies when we start the flop with the polarized bet compared to when we bet the flop with the small sizing. Okay, so when you bet the flop with the small sizing, your range is wider, therefore your range is weaker on the next street and contains more middling straight hands, and therefore your checking frequency goes up. Okay, that's usually what happens. So that would mean that on the turn, we're going to bet less often when we bet small on the flop compared to when we bet 3/4 on the flop with our overall range. Okay. One thing that none of you said was that the blocker effects are going to be less significant. Okay, so when you bet 3/4 on the flop and get called, the ace and the queen of